Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Welch.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I was struck by the questions on the law firms and the approach of President Trump to try and bring them back to the table of working with this administration. I was struck, I found some of that ironic, and the questioning, Mr. Panuccio, and welcome, great Floridian from the great free state of Florida, considering the way the law firms approached any conservative lawyer that was coming out of the last administration and the treatment of such. I thought it was very ironic. Did you notice that many lawyers who had stood up for good policies were refused employment or shut out of some of these large law firms?
Thank you, Senator. I'll be circumspect in my answer here just because I'm here to testify on universal injunctions. However, I think it's an open secret in Washington that if you work for a Republican administration, you face a much harder job market coming out than if you work for a Democratic administration. I don't think anyone doubts that to be the case generally over the years, not just specific to the Trump administration, but going back to the Bush administration and others. And you often now hear people say, well, if you take that job, you may never work again. I think that happens much more often with Republicans than Democrats. And it reflects that, law firms, like many institutions in this country, are overwhelmingly weighted in one direction politically than the other.
Mr. Panuccio, you have long been an academic, so to speak, on many of these challenges we see with nationwide injunctions, and I appreciated your testimony specifically when you quoted Justice Kagan, appointed by a Democratic president, when she said, it just can't be right that one district judge can stop a nationwide policy in its tracks and leave it stopped for the years that it takes to go through the normal process. And what struck me by that is this term normal process by someone who would know how long it takes to go through the normal process. And that basically means, it could mean the 4 years that an entire term that a president is in office. Isn't that right?
A full appellate process to the Supreme Court could take several years, yes. But, Senator, I would say, to coin a phrase, this is what democracy looks like. The founders at the Philadelphia Convention considered turning the judiciary into what was called a council of revision, which would mean the judiciary had a chance to review laws and policies of the legislative or executive branch before they went into effect. And the founders decided against that. And they said the judicial power is cases and controversies among the parties. The whole point of democracy,
let me just stop you right there. I want to focus on the normal process, the years it would take to go through the normal process, meaning let's take for a moment that we can rightfully change the law to make sure that the decisions apply to the parties before the court only. For the administration of justice to have any effect, and the people to believe that chaos and controversy and conflict can get rightfully addressed expeditiously, should it take years for these cases to go through the courts, or should Congress consider an expedited process for matters of great national concern?
I think it would be appropriate, Senator, for if the Attorney General were to certify a case as of great national importance, for there to be a faster process or mandatory jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. I will say this, though. For individual parties, if an individual party is aggrieved by executive action or legislative action, the individual party can go to a district court and get an injunction that gives complete relief to that party. And that doesn't take years. That can take days. It can take hours in certain cases. That's why the district courts are there. They're there to grant relief. Now, if what you're seeking is a change in policy nationwide, that is governing. That is what the elected branches do. But for individual parties, I don't think it's years for relief, as we've seen.
And Professor Bray, thank you for joining us. As a former judge myself, as someone who has great reverence for an independent and fair judiciary, it concerns me that the public in general, based on what we're seeing in the numbers, and I thought it was really interesting when we say 46 injunctions or orders that have gone against this administration, 9 were by Republican judges. Do you believe that limiting the relief sought to the parties in front of the court will help alleviate this idea that these are judges acting in a partisan nature?
Thanks, Senator. I do think it will reduce the appearance of partisanship because you get decision-making by more judges across the country instead of one judge giving an injunction to decide the question for the whole country.
So you believe the proposed legislation from Chairman Grassley would address bipartisan concerns?
Absolutely.
Senator Hirono?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question for Professor Bladdock. Professor Bray noted in his testimony the concern about extreme